So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for your brief introduction. I should start with an apology or perhaps a captatio benevolentia, namely that the research that I'm presenting now began quite literally with the pandemic, meaning that I have not been able to revisit and to see the objects and the places that I mentioned in this paper. So this being said, aside from their primarily civil and political functions, festivals were also fields of intense artistic experimentation. They inspired multimedia works and installations engaging with nature and natural elements and hosting different temporalities. I would like today to focus on a very small instance of this phenomena, the works of Bernard Palissy. So the question I am discussing today is, how did festive culture make Palissy possible? How does his work fit into that culture? And which changes, if any, did his work bring? Now, it is, of course, only a point of detail. Palissy made only tablewares for banqueting, yet banquets were the indispensable accompaniments of any festive event. For every tournament, for every royal entries, baptism, wedding, funeral, or official visits, several banquets were held. So even if feasting, banqueting, and celebrating are not exactly the dominant themes of Palissy work, they nevertheless are its very condition of existence. Indeed, all his productions are exclusively intended for the many banquets accompanying the festivities celebrated by the Valois, French royal family, in the second half of the 16th century. For whether it is the rustic basins and ewers or the installation work of grottoes, which were attractions of princely gardens intended to impress visitors, the purpose of Palissy's ceramic is festive. So his work is necessarily in convergence with the festive world and the expectation of his royal patrons, from whom, however, Palissy was highly dissimilar. A Calvinist servant of Catholic monarch, he took little interest in the mythological language characteristic of Valois festival and royal entries. He showed no inclination for Neoplatonism and displayed his contempt for astrology, magic, and alchemy, which were disciplines much prized by its protectors. This lecture, therefore, proposes to examine Palissy's work in this festive context of high contrast during the period of his first maturity, that is around 1550 to 1566, when he was employed by the Constable and the Montmorency, for whom he produced his first tableware sets and prepared an artificial grotto. It will be, therefore, a question of connecting some remaining example of basins, ewers, and fragments still attributed to Palissy, and examine the transformation that occurred once these works were transported from the workshop to the princely table and the garden grotto. Now, I will proceed in three parts. After a brief presentation of Palissy, I will place his work first in the context of the material world of his protectors and the Montmorency, second in the context of the rustic style and the representation of the natural world as they pertain to Renaissance festivities. And in the final part, I will examine Palissy's engagement with contemporary goldsmiths' work, as well as with the imaginary goldsmiths of the Hypnerotomachia polyphily, from whom I think he drew inspiration to articulate his character and his thinking. So let me tell you a little bit about Palissy. First, a very brief presentation. So Bernard Palissy, 1510-1590, glass painter, land surveyor, enameler, authors of grotto and rustic dishes, naturalist, as well as Calvinist martyr, is better known today. Recent interest in material culture have, in coincidence with the excavation of his Parisian workshop on the occasion of the construction of the Pyramid of the Louvre, have regenerated Palissy scholarship of the last 30 years, and as well as prompted two critical editions and numerous digital editions of Palissy's work, as well as on the earlier scholarship on Palissy. In his life, there are three main periods: youth in Agen, then Saintes, a town south of Bordeaux, until 1566, then Paris, where he takes the title of Inventeur des rustiques figurines du roi et de la reine sa mère, Now, from Paris, he spent some years in Sedan after the Saint Bartholomew, but returns to Paris, where he lectures and publishes his Discours admirables in 1580. There's a copy here. The death of Catherine de' Medici in 1589 probably deprived him of his main protector, and imprisoned for his Calvinist allegiances, he died in the Bastille in 1590. Now, although in his writings, Palissy presents himself in an egocentric, if not a self-mythographic fashion, he did not sign or mark any of his work. Perhaps he relied on his unique style, his inimitable technique, and the fame of his grotto to establish his name without need to inscribe it. Well, if so, it was completely wrong, for not only he was quickly imitated, but also, and until very recently, scholars conflated his work with that of his imitators. Let me show you a little bit of what was thought to be Palissy. For recent research, based among others on technical analysis, has now relegated many pieces to the authorship of anonymous followers. The corpus of Palissy's authentic work is now reduced to less than 10 pieces and many fragments, which are currently being catalogued in France in the Figuline project. The rustic dishes with island and snake, of which I'll show you an example, which is at the Metropolitan Museum, are now dated from the beginning of the 17th century, and the Saint-Porcher ceramic on the far right of the screen are not considered anymore by him, although they might have been cooked in very nearby oven. Palissy's catalogue also lost the gravy board bathtub and the V&A dewars, on the handle of which a Venus pudica somehow awaken each time the handle is grabbed the male fantasy of touching simultaneously all parts of a desired body. The reclining nude personifying abundance in the sauce boat also invites sensuous association, this time between body, desire, and flavor. Now, the point I want to make here is that these associations are totally foreign to Palissy's sensoriality, which is very intense, but mostly attentive to nature and really indifferent to bodily pleasure. So the recent revision and tightening of the catalogue of Palissy brings a much stronger cohesion between the work that he did and his thought imbued with Calvinism as it is expressed in his publication, that is the Ordonnance de la Grotte in 1563, the Recette véritable of the same year, and then much later the Discours admirable of 1580. Nevertheless, these works, which are therefore later than Palissy, show obviously his impact on the princely table, and these also constitute a context into which his real work was integrated. So what remains of Palissy? Well, this is more or less what remains of Palissy. We know that he produced many pieces, but the authentic remains are scarce. Two basins, one in Lyon, in fact, two in Lyon. The one on the far left is at the Louvre. The next one, there are two like this in Lyon. The third one is a cast for a basin kept in Écouen. Then three ewers that you can see on the top, a pilgrim flask, and many fragments cast of frogs, lizards, shells, and vegetation, as well as cast for the term of the grotto. And in fact, the image that you see on the top, there are images of cast, namely the cast has been photographed and inverted, so it gives you a sense of Palissy's sculpture, of what he was planning to produce with these casts found in his workshop. Now, to better understand how this somehow unusual work would fit in the very official context of royal festivities, we must first turn to the two most important protectors of Palissy, for it is them that his work serves. It is thanks to their way of life and to their taste that it can exist. So let me first show you these two fellows here. So that's Antoine de Pons in that very poor black and white print, and then Anne de Montmorency. So the first protector and very important of Palissy is Antoine de Pons, Comte de Marennes. He's close to the Reformation through his first wife, and he really is the link between Palissy and Renaissance artistic culture. On his return from the court of René de France in Ferrara, where he spent about a decade, Pons introduces Palissy to his two vocations, the Reformation and the art of the earth. And from the interaction between Pons and Palissy was born the core idea of Palissy project, that is to produce with the art of the earth princely goldsmiths tableware such as plates, ewer, basin, table fountains, decorated with cast of animal and foliage. This is the primary meaning, I think, of the rustic figurine of which Palissy is the inventor. So in the 1540s, he sets to work and eventually achieve his goal at the beginning of the 1550s. Very quickly, it seems, Pons recommended Palissy to the Constable and the Montmorency, whom I will focus on for the next minute. Very quickly, it seems, Pons recommended Palissy to the Constable and the Montmorency, who acquired some ewers and rustic basins, which are already mentioned in the inventory of his Parisian hotel compiled in 1556. That same year, the Constable, accompanied by King Henry II and their entourage, visited Palissy's workshop and commissioned a rustic grotto from him, for which he received payment in 1564. Now, despite the social distance that separates them, the relationship between Pons and Palissy presupposes a certain cordiality, and this is very much echoed in the dedication of the Discours Amiral. Now, it is probably not the case with Montmorency, whose patronage is actually far more important than the patronage of Pons, as it marks a decisive turning point in Palissy's career, since it places his work in conversation with the art of his time. One could not, in fact, imagine two men more different than the Calvinist craftsman and the Catholic lord. Childhood companion of Francis I, whom he accompanied in the triumph of Marignan and supported in the disaster of Pavia, Anne de Montmorency was appointed Grand Master of the King's House in 1526, and then Grand Connétable in 1538, a dignity that made him the most powerful man of France after the king. Disgraced by François I in 1541, he came back to power in 1548 alongside Henry II and then Charles IX. He's a military leader and an administrator, but he also oversees the organization and the smooth running of court life, the king's schedule, and this is really the point of focusing on him here regarding festival, because he overlooks the many celebrations and ceremonies, baptism, wedding, funerals, royal entries, and official visits. So obviously, this is the context of this employment of Palissy, since, as I mentioned earlier, banquets would accompany all genres of celebration. Now, Palissy was a Calvinist, and Montmorency's hostility to the Reformation was fatal to many Huguenots, some he himself slaughtered with his own swords and guns on the battlefield, while he always recommended that the greatest severity should be exercised towards Calvinists. He insisted in particular that Calvinist preachers, by whom the Reformation was spreading in France from Geneva, were to be executed rather than detained, sewn in bags and dumped into river. As a military commander, Dean died in November 1567 from the wound that he suffered defending Paris at the head of the royal troops in front of Coligny. And he expired in the arms of King Charles IX, according to an account similar to that invented at the last moment of Leonardo da Vinci, but that hasn't been protested by scholars. Now, we can therefore assume that despite Palissy's dedication to him, Montmorency probably did not read the entire Recette Véritable, the last pages with the praise of the Calvinist missionary and preacher Philibert Hamelin, executed in Bordeaux in 1556, and brought an ideal picture of the establishment of the Reformed Church in Saintes, which Montmorency would have wanted to see burned down and razed to the ground. So the point I'm making here is that Montmorency was interested in Palissy's output rather than his ideas. And in fact, if you look at the personal library of Montmorency and the books that are dedicated to him, it's mostly translation of ancient and modern works of political and military history that he very much enjoyed to have read to him while dining. Now, be that as it may, the dedication of the Recette also confirmed that Palissy's Saintes workshop was built at the Connétable's expense, and that since that date, Palissy, officially at his service, has already produced many vases and basins for him. This is to say that to understand Palissy's work is first of all to place it within the collection, the empire of things, if you like, and the way of life of the Connétable, whose wealth was indeed considerable. On his death, in addition to 4 Parisian mansions, his First important biographer, 19th century scholar Francis de Crux, listed more than 130 castles, lands, and lordship. Now, the period during which, let me show you, let me move a little bit. The period during which Montmorency employed Palissy coincided with his return to politics and with the particularly active and festive years of the Château d'Écouen. Acquired in 1522 and renovated at the time of the granting of the Connétable's office, it was used to receive the king and foreign monarchs and dignitaries, as well as their retinue, which usually numbered into several hundred people. The French king stayed at Écouen no less than 14 times, meaning the French king and the court. Emperor Charles V was hosted there, as well as the Spanish ambassador who came in 1559 on the occasion of the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis. Écouen and the Parisian mansions of Montmorency and their ritual dinner, banquets, and princely celebration, as well as the Connétable collections, are therefore a sample of the artistic and material culture with which the work of the Saintonge craftsman would enter in conversation. Now, let me show you a little bit of this collection, because Montmorency is a man of wealth and taste. His collection can be summed up in a few words: contemporary art, and really the cutting edge and the big name of the time: Raphael, Leonardo, Michelangelo, he owned the slaves, Rosso Fiorentino, which decorated his private chapel, Primaticcio. He also has a collection of antique art, of which he's an avid acquirer, maps and portraits, some modern works with mythological and religious subject, and a collection of old and modern maps and portraits. Now, such is the material world of the Connétable. Maps and city views converge towards this military and conquering vision of the territory, complemented by an impressive wardrobe of parade and combat armor, of which I'm trying to show you a little example here. That's the kind of things he would wear in parade, and I'll come to the image below in a second. The portraits of kings, parents, and ancestors form a chain in the collection of the Connétable that extend to the effigies of Roman emperors and generals, to the lineage of whom he considers belonging. He's very obsessed by the idea of lineage. Religious subjects, however, dominate his environment, both in the Parisian mansion and in the Château d'Écouen, with its 12 fireplace and biblical themed tapestry. One further layer of the Connétable's environment with which Palissy works necessarily connected are images of the vegetal and animal world. These feature in the foliage, flowers, and vegetable which frame the biblical imagery, the portrait, trophies of arm, and emblematic device of the castle of Écouen, and which can even be found in the border of the Book of Hours of the Connétable. I'll show you just this detail here. And here is also a detail on the top from the Château d'Écouen. And of course, the Book of Hours of the Connétable is in Chantilly, which also belonged to him at the time. So the world of non-human is also literally part of the background of the Connétable, as confirmed by the 9 tapestries, which are listed in the section Verdures et Feuillages of the inventory of these Parisian mansions. Now, representation of fruits, vegetables, and animals is a somewhat neutral genre suitable to adorn both religious and secular images. Since non-human, as they are now called, were in the standard hierarchy of being considered devoid of intellect and rational faculties, they could decorate about anything. Non-human can be found in the margins of books of hours or in the floral wreaths of Marian iconography, from the Gothic Virgin of the Crivelli workshop to those enameled by the Della Robbia workshop, which both Palissy and Montmorency knew very well. In secular iconography, flowers and vegetables arranged in garlands or stacked in cornucopia embody the fertility brought by peace and good government. And this is indeed a very central theme of the Valois Festival that has already been studied extensively. Now, real or cast in the cold season, fruits and vegetables impose themselves as indispensable and omnipresent accessories of architectural terms as much as of the triumphal arches which punctuated the royal entries, which multiplied on the occasion of the Tour de France of Charles IX in 1564-65, or the long and festive return from Poland of Henry III. Now, this minor genre of non-human decoration reached a peak in the years 1515, 1518 at the Roman villa of the banker Agostino Chigi, decorated by Raphael and his assistant, of which you can see some example on the slide. It is very probable that the Constable feasted there, all the more so as it chose to have the stained glass window of the gallery of the west wing of the castle of Écouen, decorated with the story of love and Psyche, which Raphael had depicted in the Great Hall of the Farnesina. More importantly, the vegetal and animal ornamentation of the Chateau d'Écouen shares a very similar rustic spirit with those painted in the Farnesina. There, the garland and trellises painted by Giovanni da Udine form a vegetal encyclopedia in which Vasari has pinpointed some humor typical of the rustic style, such as in the center of the slide, the evocative juxtaposition of a squash and a fig, and we find plenty of this phallic allusion in the decorations at Écouen. Now, the Renaissance is a period anterior to the concept of sexuality, during which the rustic world occupies a space where analogy between plants, animal, and human reproduction flourish. Nothing surprising here. Rustic also means agricultural, and agriculture in the 16th century is defined as the branch of knowledge dealing with the fertility and reproduction of plants and animals. Now, transposed from the field to the world of literature, the vegetable or the vegetal protagonist of the Farnesina became the phallic emblem, for instance, of the Sienese Academy degli Intronati, or the subject of burlesque texts such as Annibale Caro commentary on the Ficcata del Padre Sicceo of 1538. Now, in images and objects, the rustic style, as it is understood at the time of Palissy, inventor de figurines rustiques, is also characterized by a naturalization of things. In architecture, for instance, following Vitruvius, tree trunk serves as columns, branch serves as the handles of cup, knives, and spoon. And I'll show you an example of a rustic cup by Giulio Romano at the bottom of the slide. Now, in 16th century France, which witnessed the flourish of agricultural treatises addressed to country gentry, including that of Palissy, the rustic world is a multifaceted compound. From the introduction of the best-selling L'Agriculture et la Maison Rustique by Charles Etienne, it seems clear that the 16th century rustic world combines the innocent imagination of the biblical Eden with the myth of the Golden Age, the pastoral universe, where shepherds speak of Neoplatonic love, and of course the topos of the locus amoenus, which are all, of course, ingredients of the decor of Valois Festival. So we can therefore see how Palissy's rustic figurine fit into this universe as a backdrop, even if the burlesque and phallic aspect of the rustic world seems quite foreign to his interest and his thinking. In fact, Palissy's intense sensory approach to earth and water as active and creative elemental forces translates into shape more reminiscent of feminine rather than masculine sexual anatomy. This is particularly conspicuous and indeed very distinctive in the basin still attributed to him, and only in these. The lizard tail and snakes could be understood as some kind of labial analogy. The addition of a little frog on the top, more or less at the anatomical position of the clitoris, is quite literally a touch of rustic humor, not completely foreign to the spirit of some of the jests reported by Brantôme in Les Dames Galantes. Similarly, the fish at the bottom, exiting through the shell or through a kind of gate of snake, seems also elusive of something going out through some kind of rectal gate. It is, of course, however, difficult to ascertain whether these illusions were intentional or not, but be that as it may, and let me show you our next slide, be that as it may, the focus of Palissy's thought on matter and life seems to have given to his only known plates shapes much closer to the deliberately feminized plates of Judy Chicago's dinner party of the 1970s than to the standard round format of basins and ewers current in the 16th century. In a way, these first plates are Palissy's version of the Origine du Monde, so famously illustrated later by Gustave Courbet. In fact, as Palissy himself wrote in 1580, he searched the entrails of the earth to understand and bring to light the thing it produced, so it seems almost logical that he selected a shape reminiscent of birth and creation. Now, unlike Judy Chicago's plays that were made only to be exposed and seen, Palissy's basins were intended to be put in action. Like other basins, they may have been used to receive the scented water that attendants administered on the hands of the guests between each service. Palissy's work fits therefore nicely in this context of images that were literally designed to be immersed and to be animated by the movement of water. So that were brought to the appearance of life and movement by water. And in the case of Palissy, that would become some kind of reenactment of his ideas about creation. Now, the basins of the Nuremberg goldsmith Wenzel Jamnitzer, dated of around 1550, 1560, offers a very good example of the art against which Palissy competed. Like Palissy's basins, it includes casts of crayfish, frog, turtles, and snake, but in contrast to Palissy's composition, Jamnitzer has arranged his casts like a clock dial. Each section frames a frog and a crayfish, and sometimes there are two crayfish and one frog behind two sections. Now, even though these are repeats of the same three identical casts, their placement conceals their similarities. Moreover, in the spirit of Mannerist sculpture, the angles of view change the appearance of each animal and accentuate the impression of variety. Now, Palissy also repeats the same patterns. He takes some casts and then he repeats them and put them in different positions. Like Jamnitzer, and as he explains himself when he speaks of the fountain that irrigates his grotto project, he takes advantage of the optical and reflective properties of water to enliven his work. The irregular movement of the wave must indeed animate the snake, the tails of the lizard, as well as the turtle, crustaceans, and rock of the bottom, both in Palissy and Jamnitzer's work, although they are obviously very different. But in particular, the animal placed on the edge of the pool, half submerged, their heads immobile and their bodies temporarily blurred by the optical distortion of the scented water, must have seemed very much alive. Now, let me move to this image that I'd like to show you more in detail. Oh no, I want to show you this first. Well, it doesn't really matter, but anyway. It was first for life casting that Palissy rivaled with goldsmiths. This art consists, of course, of taking the imprint of the dead to give them the appearance of life. It's an uninterrupted tradition since the antiquity, but in the 15th century, it really entered history of art in the very capable hands of Ghiberti, Donatello, Verrocchio, and a few others. And by the 16th century, casting has developed into a virtuoso practice in the field of goldsmithry, where even insects, herbs, and delicate flowers were collected and reproduced. Palissy, therefore, places his earthenware in dialogue with such work when he asserted in the Ordonnance de la Grotte that his figurine each reproduced the thousands of dissimilar scales of the lizard and snake that he casts. And I'll show you, it's an example of lizards from the Jamnitzer dynasty. I mean, a workshop, but it's a dynasty. Now, there's such naturalistic achievement connect with a few classical figures of the princely table, in particular the table triumph, which mix the tangible and the edible, or the tradition of refeathering cooked poultry in order to give it the appearance of life. Vincenzo Cervio, in his treatise on the art of banquet, describes such method and mentioned the quivering of this feather, which is a kind of sign of life, if you like. Live animals were also used, as confirmed by the account of a banquet in honor of the Medici held in Rome at the Campidoglio in 1513. There, birds of various species retained inside the guest napkins flew out at the start of the party, which they brightened up with their song. So we see how the naturalism inherent in immersing cast animals to make them move converge towards this taste for the living. And we also find this exploitation of the animal world in the Recette Véritable. At the entrance of his artificial grotto, Palissy recommends planting shrubs carrying berries, which birds are fond of, in order to ensure the consistency or to secure the consistency of their melodious song. And in the grotto as well, next to the cast fish, he used also real fish to bring further play and further confusion. Now, let me show you this title page. Now, the Farnesina and the princely table are places where the refinement of the classical world meet the efflorescences of the rustic world. Another such cultural roundabout, if you like, which Palissy and his protector knew very well, is Francesco Colonna, Hypnarotomachia Polyphili, or Songe de Polyphile, published in Venice in 1499 by the prestigious Aldine Press and put in vogue in France thanks to the translation of Jean Martin, published in 1546, 54, and 61. In the Ordonnance de la Grotte, Palissy compares his work to the dream of Polyphilus, but even more, he models his image on the author of the imaginary works that decorate the universe of the Songe. Now, the Songe de Polyphile recounts the initiatory journey of the young Polyphile, sown with trial, rites, and festivity, and describes with considerable attention to art, material, and nature. Scholars have already identified the links between Colonna's evocation and the work of Palissy. But in addition to the garden, which has been the main subject of focus of previous scholarship, which are considered ancestor of the gardens of the Recette Véritable, apart from the garden, the Songe de Polyphile abounds in description of bas-reliefs, friezes, fountains, basins, ewers, where the representation of minerals, flowers, leaves, fruits, and animals expresses the parallel refinement of art and nature. And we even observe there, as in Palissy, and I quote, des lézards et des couleuvres moulés sur le naturel, lizard and snake cast from nature. Now, this similarity are all the more evident as Palissy adopts the same title as the mysterious author of the marvelous work of Polyphilus' dream. That is, he called himself an ouvrier. And this ouvrier is not, of course, a member of the classe ouvrière or working class, but rather an artist, and a translation of the Italian term artefice. The model of the good ouvrier is God, grand ouvrier de la machine du monde, and his opposite is the modern Gade-Pierre, manœuvrier, ignorant of good letters and not following reason. The good ouvrier then embodies the humanistic ideal known in France since the arrival of Leonardo and disseminated as much by artistic literature. Martin, the translator of the Polyphile, also translated Alberti, but also disseminated by the fame of the major artistic project of the French court. For this ouvrier, like Leonardo, but also like Cellini, is a draftsman, sometimes painter, but architect, sculptor, hydraulic engineer, gardener, and even a goldsmith. That is someone who knows the property of things and can make stuff out of them. Colonna lists these attributes when speaking of the good ouvrier in this term: le bon esprit, le prompt discours, l'art excellent, l'ingénieux dessein, le profond savoir, la merveilleuse diligence et l'invention supernaturelle. These are the attributes of the bon ouvrier. So the constant interweaving of art and nature, as much as the erudition with which the name of minerals and plants are listed, both in the Ordonnance de la Grotte, Palissy's first publication, which describes his grotto project, is so very close to the style of the French Songe de Polyphile that one might even wonder whether Palissy was assisted in writing this text. In any case, he calls himself ouvrier de terre because he finds in the ouvrier of the Songe the distinctive attribute of artistic fame. And thanks to this model, through which he articulates his own myths, Palissy presents himself with the same dignity as the artist and goldsmith whose works cover the walls and shine on the table and dresser of the Connétable. Now, let me show you some example of a dresser, and that would be that will lead me to my conclusion. Now, the idea of goldsmith's work in terracotta also explored the attention to artistic work characteristic of Renaissance art theory. But I should have said before that it also involved a commercial dimension, an entrepreneurial dimension. That is the idea of making goldsmith's work with modest material. And in fact, many celebrations, many banquets took place in Paris and therefore consumed lots of dishes. Pierre de l'Étoile, in his diary, mentions that over 1,000 earthenware dishes were broken by the negligence of the servant of the Cardinal de Birague during the simple collection he offered to the king on January 26, 1580. So basically, there was a big demand for earthenware, or that's what seems to be suggested. Nevertheless, the idea of goldsmith work in terracotta also explored the attention to artistic work characteristic of Renaissance art theories. Leon Battista Alberti, in his De Pictura, established this taste as early as the 1530s by recommending the pictorial representation of gold rather than the application of gold leaf. And a century later, Vasari expresses very much the same taste in his life of Cosimo Rosselli, which recounts how a mediocre journeyman concealed his mediocrity and secured the favor of Pope Borgia by flattering his bad Iberian taste for everything shiny and putting lots of gold and ornament, because this poor Rosselli had no disegno. Also did Vasari say. Now, at the time of Vasari and Palissy, the appreciation of artistic work, independently of matter, unfolded not only in the intimate atmosphere of private collection, but also on the tables and credenza of the powerful. The credenza or dresser is a piece of furniture with shelves intended to showcase the ceremonial dishes of the house. Palissy seemed to have used a similar type of furniture while lecturing to display his collection of mineral and shells in the late 1570s. But the princely dresser would hold historiated cups, ewers, and basins, gilded and often enriched with gems, as well as objects of lesser material value, but of equally ingenious workmanship. This is the case of the Saint-Porcher ceramic, of which I'll show you some example here. This is probably the case of some of the work of Palissy, such as the ewer with crayfish and frogs. Now, a few folds even appeared on the credenza and the princely table. In fact, the art of folding napkins and tablecloths seemed to have reached height of virtuosity, which earned it a place alongside goldsmith's work in a context where the folding work stood out as a play of light and shade. So Palissy work, therefore, presents many points of intersection with the festive world of his time, but his world and his ideas are fundamentally very different. And let me go down and I'll show you the final slide as I'm concluding. This really sums up all the pictures I've shown during that lecture. Now, like Leonardo, Palissy sees the world more in terms of continuity than in terms of mineral, vegetal, and animal stratification. In the Recette, he writes of the art of pruning trees in terms of war surgery. Detecting movement and intelligence in non-humans, he turned to shellfish and to crustaceans to imagine architectures and fortifications. Elsewhere, merging mineral and vegetal gestations, he presents the earth as an element in constant activity, generating metals ripening like fruits. It is in fact his definition of earth that he imagines so intensely busy that he also conceives and certainly feels himself as an ouvrier de terre, as literally made of this very active substance. Now, the rustic dishes and grotto were therefore the fruit of a long religious, philosophical, scientific, and technical gestation, but were in their time understood as belonging to a category of precious, exquisite, expensive, and mostly insignificant objects. Now, Palissy was not the only artist whose intentions were lost in the worldly appreciation of his work. Renaissance artists were not always understood as only beautiful images with a subject appropriate to the place decorated were expected from them, while writers had the power, but also the drawbacks of signifying. Thus, the religious conflict of the 16th century and this special status of images and artists gave rise to numerous manifestations of a phenomena according to which images express a religious heterodoxy brutally suppressed when written or spoken. Michelangelo, as recent study have suggested, Michelangelo linked to the Philo-Protestant circle of Vittoria Colonna could have composed what amounts to a Lutheran manifesto in the frescoes of the Pauline Chapel, therefore in the heart of the Roman Catholic world. In France, the Protestant allegiance of artisans in the service of the crown is well known. Etienne Delaune, for instance, silversmith and engraver, produced mythological fantasies mocking Catholic practices, but also designed jewelries and decorated arms and armors worn by the Catholic nobility. To this list should be added the case of Bernard Palissy, early Calvinist, in the dishes and basin of whom the Catholic aristocracy of France and Spain undoubtedly feasted and rinsed their hands, especially on the occasion of the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis, 1559, whose festivities, fatal to Henry II, celebrated the end of the war between the two powers and announced the resumption of persecution against the Huguenots. Now, certainly, and this is really an issue with the actor network theory that I'm trying to address here, certainly Michelangelo's fresco did not temper the hostility of the popes toward the Reformation, nor did the tablewares and grottos of Palissy moderate the anti-Protestant violence of his Catholic patrons. In fact, it led to the St. Bartholomew. In Palissy's case, however, a somewhat reverse phenomena seemed to have happened. The integration of his work with those of the princely world correspond to an important period in the formation of his identity and of his artistic, intellectual, and social aspiration. He is not the one who changes the world with his rustic dish. It is their networking with the avant-garde art of the time that changed him, prompting the crystallization of his character, of his figure as a scholar, artist, writer, a Saturnian in the Italian fashion, a solitary creator, yet father of 8 children. In short, the feast and the princely table, from which it is doubtful that Palissy ever drank, are nevertheless the condition for the existence of his work, for the development of his character, and of his revendication to knowledge. He published, after all, over 800 pages. I think he's the most prolific artist-writer of the 16th century, before Lomazzo. At a broader level, Palissy's work and their remain highlight one more facet at festivals, their ability to include and integrate different worlds and different temporalities, from the evocation of the Golden Age to Palissy's enamel snapshot of the geological time of the movement of the earth, animated by the scented water of Valois festivities. Thank you very much for your attention.